Now, a brand that I've known about for such a long time, yet had very little in terms of actual listening experience and so on, and that's Klipsch. The Reference Premiere Home Cinema Speaker Package, you looked at that a few weeks back. Tell us all about that. Tell us about the kit, and tell us about Klipsch a little bit, because I think they're still a bit of an unknown in the UK.
Yeah, they're fairly dominant in the US market, I gather. They've been around for donkey's years. I'm not quite sure how long they've been around, but they're famed for their horn technology. I think they call it the Tractrix horn geometry. And so all their speakers, going back to the very original iteration, use these compression drivers and horn arrangements, and are known for being incredibly sensitive speakers, meaning that they are very easy to drive with lower powered amplifiers. Even their very large speakers are highly efficient. Now there's a slight question mark about the way Klipsch measure their efficiency. It's slightly different to the way other manufacturers do, so they probably slightly overstate their efficiency. But the kind of bottom line is Klipsch are known to be highly dynamic, highly efficient speakers and horn based. And similar to you, actually, I've known about Klipsch for as long as I've been into AV, really, but I've never really had much opportunity to listen to them, and certainly never in my own home. I've listened to the Klipsch Cornwalls, which are these big wardrobe-size speakers that very, very famous and much loved among Klipsch fans. But I've never listened to their more sort of domestic AV offerings. So I was very interested to get these in the house. And give them a whirl. And the Reference Premiere is really their main AV offering. And as a range, it's huge. There are lots of different speakers. So pretty much any permutation for your living arrangements that you need, you can probably find it with the Reference Premiere system. And the setup I reviewed was towards the kind of upper end of the Reference Premiere range. It was the RP8060 FA2, doesn't really roll off the tongue, floor standers, which are dual 8-inch woofers, again with that horn-based arrangement for the tweeter. The RP504 center, the RP502 S2 surrounds, which are dipole surrounds. And for those of you who don't know what dipole surrounds are, they're essentially side firing, so they're slightly triangular, and they have woofer that fires in one direction, woofer that fires in the other direction, and tweeter that does the same, fire in opposite directions. And the distinction between dipole speakers and bipole speakers is bipole speakers do the same, but dipoles, the woofers, the opposite sides are out of phase with one another, which the effect that creates is it creates a slight null in the frequency response directly on axis in front of the speaker. And the idea behind dipole sort of theory is that when you're sat in that null, when you're sat on axis to the speaker, you find it difficult to localize where the sound is coming from. So the theory is they create a much more immersive ambient surround field where you struggle to localize the speaker. And I've got some thoughts on that, which I'll come to later. And the other part of the package was their 12-inch RP1200 SW subwoofer, which is relatively short and not terribly wide, but possibly the deepest subwoofer that I have reviewed, certainly other than the behemoths like the large Polisson. I think it was 65 centimeters, slightly over 65 centimeters deep, and when you look at it, it's long. It's a very weird shape for a subwoofer. So for some people that might be easy to accommodate. For others, it'd be very awkward. So really, have a think about its depth before you buy one of these. In terms of design, as I said, the standard Klipsch horn arrangement with their orange, they're copper colored woofers, which are ceramic, and I think it's aluminium. Yeah, composite ceramic and aluminium. And that's a trademark of Klipsch. Pretty well all their speakers have those copper colored woofers. The really interesting part about the system, and the thing that one of the reasons I really wanted to have a play with it, is the floor standards are up firing. So the Atmos bounce speakers that sort of fire the sound. They have an up firing woofer and tweeter at the top of the speaker, and that fires against the ceiling, reflects off the ceiling down to the listener, and it's intended to create Atmos top height level effect. But the interesting thing about the Klipsch is, being as their horn arrangement, you use that horn to fire against the ceiling, and that controls the directivity slightly better than your typical sort of flat tweeter would, which sort of spreads sound energy like all over the place. The horn focuses it. So theoretically, that should work really well with the bounce arrangement, because it's more laser-like, as it were. I mean, it's not quite, but you get the point. So I really wanted to have a play with that. And so overall, the performance, I would say, is they're very natural sounding speakers. They're not one might get the impression from sort of reading about Klipsch and knowing that they're high sensitivity horn-based speakers that they might be quite shouty, because horn-based speakers have that sort of reputation historically. They are absolutely not shouty in the least. They're very smooth sounding for the most part, very natural sounding, quite detailed, and very, very dynamic. I did find there was a little bit of high frequency harshness on occasion, not quite shoutiness, but just a little bit of harshness. And that I noticed in the Jenny Lind Never Enough song in The Greatest Showman, which people probably heard a million times. And you really need to, any speaker that is susceptible at all to any form of harshness, that will reveal it, and it did with Klipsch, and it was a little bit edgy, but as I say, not terribly offensively so. The detail could have been a little bit better. There were a couple of places where I noticed that it sounded a little bit recessed, more recessed than I've heard on other systems. So Ready Player One, the race scene, I use specifically for that sort of detail resolution, detail retrieval, because it's an incredibly detailed scene. There's just loads going on. And there's a particular scene where Wade slides his car under a truck and then collects a bunch of coins that be sort of emitted of the previously departed contestant, and that just didn't sound anywhere near as detailed as I've heard it before. So yeah, there's on the one hand they can be slightly harsh, but on the other hand they're not that detailed, which is a strange combination. Bass and mid-range, absolutely fantastic. So pretty much the whole range that those composite woofers are covering, just beautiful, like really refined. They really nailed their woofers there. The sub, again, yeah, good, really impactful. Didn't really dig as deep as some of the other subs that I've tested, but you know, I've noted in many of my reviews that I'm actually more interested in that sort of transient bass impact than I am in the outright depth, the sort of infrasonic stuff. The infrasonic stuff's incredibly hard to do unless you throw tens of thousands of pounds at it, frankly. So yeah, I'm more interested in that upper bass, the transient impact, and the Klipsch sub did it very well. The standout sort of feature of its performance was the bounce. They've nailed it. I've heard upfirers both in my room, outside my room, like several times. Never heard it as good as the Klipsch. It's almost uncanny how they can convey specific objects above your head. I mean, it's never going to be as good as actual speakers physically located on the ceiling. It's more of an approximation of that effect, but it's pretty close, to the point where if you're not an enthusiast, I think that's probably going to be enough for you, really. So, even if you are an enthusiast, it might well be enough for you. It depends how, averse you are to putting speakers in your ceiling, which are not always easy to accommodate. So overall, they sounded fantastic. I had a little bit of a beef with some of the harshness. My main sort of gripe, which I had in the review, is the floor standards are around about 3K. And as with the entire system, they use sort of vinyl wrap for their cabinets. Just not really happy with black vinyl wrap on a three grand pair of speakers, really. Can do better than that. And other manufacturers manage to with wood veneer or high quality paint finishes, and this just felt a little bit cheap.